turned home wondering what had happened. Word of God, word of life. Convinced that in every household, in every family, there are two people. There is one who wanders from room to room to room to room to room to room, wondering, where are my glasses that are on my head the whole time? And then there's the other one who finds everything, right? I'm sure that's never happened to you. It's even more frustrating if you're traveling and you're out of the home and you can't go back to get it, right? And you realize that you've forgotten the thing and you feel an anger over the loss, a frustration. Dang it, David, you did it again. You know, I usually preach and lead worship off my iPad, and Megan didn't remind me, and so I left it at home this morning. And so here I am using paper for my notes for my sermon like some sort of Neanderthal this morning. The Easter story is a story about lostness, about wondering. They didn't just lose their keys or their phone, but they had lost everything. They had lost their hopes. They had lost their dream. They had lost their plan for the future. They were entirely lost and hopeless on that Easter morning. And it happened in a world like ours. In the first century, the world was at war. We talk about it as the Pax Romana, right? But the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, happens at the end of a sword as they wage war all around them. And we too live in a world like that, a world where war seems not to end. Just this morning, our president said to the world that if he does not get his way, he will destroy a whole nation. We live in a world where war seems not to end, where violence seems not to end, where political and cultural division seem not to end, even smaller, where personal griefs seem to not end, burnout and quiet despair, divisions amongst us. You and I, we live in a world that knows how to deal in death. Yes, physical death. We're very good at it. We live at a time where our wars and our violence are more deadly than they have ever been at any time in human history. But also those deaths that we live with. A death of trust, a death of community, a death of connection to one another. This slow erosion that we experience of hope and hopefulness. And we have to tell the truth about that because death is real. There's no getting around it, right? There's nothing certain in life except death and taxes. Happy April, friends. Death is real, but if the Easter story is true, death does not get the last word. Our encounter with the empty tomb leaves us full of hope. So let's go back to that story, right? In Luke 24, early in the morning on the first day of the week, before the sun had risen, the women go to the tomb, and they find that the stone is rolled away, and what is their reaction? Do they say, thank God? No, they're full of fear. They're full of fear. They are frightened and afraid and confused and bewildered. Talk about the state of my life. The disciples dismiss it. They come back, and this is fantastic. This will preach. On a week like we've had this week with stories of sexual violence and assault. The women came back, and the words struck the apostles as nonsense, and they did not believe the women. That'll preach. They did not believe the women. And the disciples did not believe either, and they were afraid as well, and they were confused and bewildered as well. It sounds too good to be true. The response to the resurrection often is not immediately thanksgiving and faith, but fear and confusion. It's not just doubting Thomas that we heard about last week. All of the apostles respond like this. Everyone who hears it responds like this because it doesn't fit the experience of how the world works. And I get that. Most of what we see in the world tells us that death has the last word. No matter how bad things can get, they can always get a little bit worse, can't they? Some might say that every silver lining has a cloud, right? We are used to a world where there is always bad news right around the corner. But Easter whispers something different, that death is real, but death does not get the last word. Death is real, but death does not get the last word. So jump to this story that was read so well from us from Ezekiel chapter 37, one of my favorite stories, the Valley of Dry Bones. We read it every Easter sunrise service. The prophet looks out on this valley filled with dry bones, not corpses, not graves, bones that had been laying out for so long that they were dry and brittle, that they were sun-bleached. This is not a hospital, it's a graveyard. And it's a graveyard that's been one for a long time. And God asks the prophet Ezekiel, "Mortal, can these bones live?" And the logical, reasonable answer is, of course not. Of course they can't. These are dry bones. These are skeletons. These are lost causes. Can these bones live? Of course they cannot. Of course there will be more war to follow the war that we are in now. Of course there will be more violence to follow the violence that we read about now. Of course our families will continue to have discord and struggles. Of course, our communities will continue to be the way that they are, so divided, because that's just the way the world works, isn't it? But the prophet doesn't answer from logic. The prophet doesn't give a reasonable answer. The prophet says instead, out of his faith, "Oh God, only you know." That's the faithful answer. Only you know, O God. Can war end? Only you know, God. Can I restore my relationships with the people I love? Only you know, God. Can I be lifted out of this pit of despair where I find myself? Only you know. God does not avoid the valley of death. God walks through it. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. God does not avoid the valley of dry bones. God speaks into it. God says, "Live. Rise." God doesn't respond to death with more death, but instead responds to death with life, with breath, with hope. In the valley of dry bones, even there is hope. Even at the empty tomb, there is hope, because death is real. But God says that death does not get the last word. Paul is blunt about it. I love this passage from Romans 15. Paul says, if there is no resurrection, let's all go home. He says, if there is no resurrection, we are most to be pitied out of all the people in the world. Feel sorry for us. If there is no resurrection, everything we're doing is worthless nonsense. If there is no resurrection, faith is empty, and we're stuck in that cycle of violence begetting violence, of hatred begetting more hatred, of broken relationships and hurt people producing more broken relationships and hurt people. If death gets the last word, then violence, fear, and despair win. But Paul says, the gospel says, Christ has been raised. The tomb is empty. That's our celebration still, as we are still in Easter. It did not end 2 weeks ago, but continues today. Good Friday, we experience the worst of humanity. That violence kills innocent people. That fear causes faithful people to run away. That empires have the power to act with impunity. The cross exposes, Good Friday exposes the worst of us, but we know that the cross is not the end. And the resurrection reveals, Easter Sunday reveals the heart of God. And God is life, and God is love, and God is overpowering hope and restoration and reconciliation. To be hopeful is not to ignore the reality of the world around us. To be hopeful is not to say we don't walk through the valley of dry bones, the valley of the shadow of death. To be hopeful is not to say there is no Good Friday. But to be hopeful is to face reality and still believe that God is not finished. Easter is still coming. Optimism says, well, everything will be fine. It will all work out in the end. And denial says, it's not that bad, really. Other people have it worse. But hopeful people look at the valley of dry bones, the valley of the shadow of death. Hopeful people look at the Good Friday and say, God is not done here yet. God is not done with our emptiness and our brokenness. God is not done here yet. I hope you've heard of the poet Maya Angelou. She writes this: you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. That's resurrection language right there. That is Easter language. She goes on to say, just like moons and suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope's springing high, still I rise. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. I'll rise. The world pushes us down, and something in us, something from God, keeps rising, and we call that something hope. Indefeatable hope, unceasing hope, unflinching hope that looks at the world with realistic eyes and says, God is not done here yet. To live without that hope is to cease to live, really live. Maybe that's why resurrection matters so much, because without it, we don't just lose a belief, a creed, an idea, but rather we lose a way to live. In the midst of all of the Good Fridays of the world, hope still rises. I love this picture. It might be hard to see. This is of Gaza. Those of you who went with us last month know that last month was a holy period for our Muslim friends, and the majority of the people in Gaza are Muslim. And it ends with a holiday called Eid Fitr. And running down the middle of that, the middle of the rubble, the destroyed buildings, I challenge you to see one building fully standing there, is a table, is a feast, is a celebration. Still I rise. Good Friday does not get the last word for any of us. Hope is what it means to live. To be hopeful is what it means for us to live, to truly live in systems that feel beyond repair, in a world that feels too broken to be fixed, in our own exhaustion and our cynicism and our numbness to the news that rolls over us day after day after day. Where have you already decided, well, it's just the way it is. Nothing I can do about it. Que sera, what will be, will be. Where have you stopped expecting anything new, anything beautiful, anything exciting or hopeful? Where have you given up that hope? Where is your valley of dry bones? Where is your Good Friday? Because tomorrow we will wake up, having experienced our Easter Sunday here, we will wake up tomorrow and the world will still be the world. The headlines will still be the same. The problems in our lives will still be there. But we do not walk into that world empty. We walk in as a people who know that death is real, but it does not get the last word. We know death is real, but it does not get the last word. The empty tomb leaves us hopeful as we go out into this world. Empowered by hope to see the world through the eyes of God. Empowered by hope to see the potential in our neighbor and in the world. To look for life where we expected none. To speak hope where others expect despair. To refuse to let our cynicism have the last word. To give love where others continue to bring hatred. Because the resurrection is not just something we believe, it is something we live. Hopefully. The tomb on Easter is empty. The world is not finished. And friends, neither are you. God is not done here. God is not done with the world, and God is not done with you. And for that, we have hope.